Okay, well, yeah. So welcome to Discourse Diner, Kraut. Thanks for coming on to talk with us. So I guess we'll
Thank you
be
for having me.
so I guess we'll be getting into the questions here in a minute, or into the AMA. So if anybody has any questions, make sure you get them posted in the questions channel so we can pick from there some questions to field. And So if anybody that's listening isn't familiar with Kraut, I assume most of you are. He's a successful YouTuber with 184,000 subscribers. He's a commentator on, or a historical and political commentator. But Kraut, would you like to take a second to elaborate on the topics that you pursue or the content that you produce before we start?
I guess I could say that I spent 3 years giving my opinions most of the time,
Yeah.
and in the last year decided to cut my opinions out of my content, just present basic facts, sociological, economic, etc., and let people form their own opinions. And that's what I'm pursuing now. I just present things and let people discuss them themselves.
Okay,
I
that's an interesting neutral approach. Um, But actually, my first question kind of pertained to your opinion. So if you if you're comfortable getting into that,
sure, sure.
um, I've been watching the Turkish Century video that you put up in March, and I was really enjoying that content. Somebody posted a question on that. Tomb Explorer asked, has your views on Islam or Islamism changed since working on the Turkey video? Has that changed what your feelings about it?
I am a very almost a very anti-religious person, almost. Like I
Yeah.
have really close to no tolerance for any kind of religiously inspired politics. And one of the reasons why I'm making this video in particular is because Turkey for a very long time was, the one secular majority Muslim society, the one democratic secular republic within the Islamic world. And I would like to elaborate and to explain to people how that came to be, how it developed, how it declined recently, and how, I think when back in the days when I was making my content on Islamism itself and constantly talking about it and the threat it poses to democracy, the one thing that I feel that the community that I was part of unfortunately did was slip into this kind of attitude of, well, those people there, in the Middle East, those savages, they don't know any better. They should all stay down there and continue being what they are and doing all the horrible things that they do, which is an attitude that I fundamentally disagree with. Within my lifetime, I would like to see the Saudi monarchy collapse. I would like to see the secular republic return to Iran. Um, I would like to see secularism restored in Turkey, and I'd like to provide people the perspectives of what is possible and what has been and what could be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely one of the most interesting things to track nowadays is how secularism spreads and what effects that has on societies. Um,
But that's just one video. I'm going to delve into far more topics. Like when I'm done with Turkey, I'm going to do a little sidetrack talking about how shitty Raid Shadow Legends is. That's going to be a very short sidetrack. But after that, we're going to talk about Mexico and economic institutions and how the founding of a nation, how it was created, etc., can shape a country's economic institutions for centuries to come, and why Mexico is so screwed, and the geopolitics of the drug war and of the mass migrations, and the economic interdependence between the United States and Mexico. That's going to be a topic after that. We're going to talk about the Congo and how resources can be a curse for a nation, not necessarily always a blessing. So there's a lot of topics that we're going to go into in the near future.
cool. And then, okay, I've got another question. Let's see. Do you believe democracy will overcome populism in the long term? Sorry if these aren't connected together in very good order. I'm just picking from who got
Yeah,
pinned.
that's I am of the general attitude that democracy is always and almost constantly under threat. That you should never take liberties and rights that you have for granted. That there's always a chance that they just Like I am someone from the position who sees it as a constantly vulnerable thing that needs to be actively protected and guarded. So yeah, I would say that it is under threat, and that it is possible that it disappears. But sorry, please continue.
No, yeah, that's a pretty big concern for me. Let's see. With falling into economic crisis, do you think that populist parties will surge in popularity like they did in 2011 to 2013? This was asked by
Yes, yes,
Dr. Piraquito, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce that
yes,
exactly.
yes, yes.
And
I'm not
then,
an economist.
oh, sorry,
I'm
go ahead.
not an economist. I'm not an economist, but even I can see, and anyone can see who observes what is happening throughout the world with COVID. This is going to have a massive impact on us, and I think a lot of people don't even realize how much, economically speaking. Britain currently is undergoing the worst recession since the South Sea bubble. That's the worst recession in 300 years. And one thing that is happening throughout the world and that can be easily observed is that smaller businesses and mid-tier businesses are having trouble paying debts, paying their employees, etc., running into distress and declaring bankruptcy and being bought up by larger investment firms and hedge funds. And at the end of COVID, the economy will probably gear up again, but we're going to be in a world where a lot fewer people will own a lot more of the world's wealth. We're going to enter an era of extreme wealth inequality like we've never seen before due to COVID. Because the billionaires, millionaires, people who already have enough money to not fear an economic recession, they're going to go on a massive shopping tour during this lockdown. I guarantee you that. And it's already happening. You can observe it.
Okay, and that was actually a two-parter. He also asked, what is your opinion on the small country of Portugal?
I would like to do a video on that one because it's always been a kind of an outlier in Europe. If you, this is a bit unrelated, but it is a very telling little quote. There used to be a slogan, a political slogan in the fascist Franco regime in Spain, which was the Africa begins in the Pyrenees. Pyrenees, yes, that's the mountain range between Spain and France. And the statement there was that we are so distant from continental Europe, so separated from it, that we do our own thing here. And you have to keep in mind, this is in many ways true. Not as much for Spain, because Spain is still connected to the Mediterranean, but Portugal is separated from continental Europe through the two mountain ranges that separate it from Spain. I don't know what the names of those are. And then it is separated from continental Europe again by the Pyrenees. And Portugal also has no access to the Mediterranean Ocean. So if we're going to talk about Portugal in the future, it's going to be about how it was always an outward-looking nation. Always, Portugal and Portuguese people always had a tendency of going out into the world. I'm not just talking about the sailors. The great era of expedition, and exploration when they sailed around the world and built colonies. There's currently, for example, a substantial Portuguese minority in Angola and various West African countries. Many Portuguese immigrants in China. And there is an entire district of France, for example, which is almost in its entirety Portuguese. It's always been like, yeah, if we get there, like I said before, it's going to be the story of an outward-looking, exploring people, basically. Okay.
Okay. All right. And then the Swede asks, when did you first get into politics? Is there a time that you can kind of designate as the beginning, or no?
When did I get what? Sorry, I
Oh,
roboted
sorry.
briefly.
I guess just when did you get into politics?
Into YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube politic commentary, I assume.
I made my first video when the Cologne mass sexual assaults happened. And it was just I just didn't have a place to express my frustration and anger. It was just me rambling into a microphone. And I uploaded it to YouTube. About expressing my anger over the police cover-up, the media cover-up, the really inappropriate and really just stupid way the state handled all of this and the media handled all of it. And weirdly enough, a lot of people came to watch it. So, okay, I uploaded more. After a year of doing this, I thought, maybe I could monetize this. So I did that, which also worked. My channel had lots of ups and downs since. And yeah, it started with me being an angry person on the internet, ironically. It evolved considerably from there.
I think that gets a lot of people into it, if I had to guess. Um, and then let's see. I guess a question similar to that from Ardma. How did you get interested in geopolitics, and what inspired you to make a channel about it? I guess so. Is that too similar of a question? Do you think that there's anything extra
I've
there?
always been interested. I've always been interested in geopolitics, but I unfortunately started my channel as a social politics channel and a culture warrior, to be very frank.
Yeah.
And I had to pry myself free from it, which I did over the course of the last year. And now I can focus on what is more relevant, if we're being honest, in the political sphere. Like right now, as we are recording this, a lot of the YouTubers in the culture warrior and cultural politics sphere and the sociopolitics sphere are rambling and ranting about Twitch establishing a trust and safety council. And I just look at that and scratch my head in amusement because, like, how on earth is that in any way relevant in our political environment? What hinges on this? What are you doing, wasting your time talking about this? And I'm very happy that I can now talk about economics, history, and all that stuff, because and geography and all the things that I believe are far more interesting and far more relevant to us.
Cool. Well, that definitely sounds like more interesting content to me, I guess, as far as getting into the larger forces at play, I guess.
You seem to sometimes not know if I finished answering the question. You can cut
Oh,
this.
sorry. Did you have?
How about every time I finish a question, I hit my glass with my vapor like this?
Sounds good to me. Sorry, sorry if I cut you off there.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I'm switching back and forth between reading here. So did you want to elaborate on that one a bit more, or do you want to field another one?
If there is another question concerning that, sure. Is there?
Not on the same topic, but let's see. Okay, so what's your opinion on the European Union, and do you think it should be disbanded? That's from the pro European Union human.
I think that nobody can doubt and question anymore today that the European Union is in crisis, right? And I believe that this entire crisis of confidence within European institutions can be traced back to one specific moment, and that is when the Greeks, right, they had an austerity program enforced upon them by the German government. And then they had an election, and the Greeks voted for a Marxist party. You may disagree or agree with Marxism, I don't care. But the fact of the matter is the Greeks voted for them because they promised to abandon the austerity measures. And then that government instituted a referendum where the Greeks decidedly voted against austerity. And the European institutions, led by the Germans, the Dutch, and some Italians, just walked all over it. It didn't matter what the Greeks wanted. And I believe that is the origin of the crisis. And it's often brought up in conversations about this that, well, the only other alternative would have been to kick Greece out of the EU, right? And to that, I have to say, okay, then that would have been more preferable. That would have been ultimately more preferable than just stomping all over a country's democracy and the decision that the people made. And that is where a lot of my Euroscepticism come from. I do think that the idea of a European confederacy, where nation states can cooperate in economics and in regulation, is a good idea. But I don't believe it is a good idea at the cost of the democratic institutions and liberties of the citizens of various countries. And as long as the ardent defenders of the European institutions cannot answer the questions that came out of that crisis in Greece when the EU just overruled the democratically made decision by the Greek people, I will continue to be very skeptical of the European Union.
All right. Malarkey asks, do you think that the Cold War with China that you predicted to happen in 20 years will be delayed because of the coronavirus?
No. Just
No.
do yourself a favor. No, it's like do yourself this. Go out on the internet and find yourself Chinese people and talk to them. Like you people always talk about the great Chinese firewall, right? And how
Yeah.
that we supposedly can't talk to Chinese people. That's nonsense. Chinese people are very tech savvy. A lot of them use the internet as we all do, right? And if you talk to Chinese people, especially those who are very communist, they're very open about it. They talk, yeah, we are in a Cold War. Like we in the West, we have debates about it, and because oh maybe it isn't that and blah blah blah. But the Chinese are very clear about it. Yeah, we are. We are your competitor. We are trying to be a global superpower. That's why we are building an aircraft carrier fleet. We want to be on an equal standing with the United States in 30 years. Like, doesn't care about what it doesn't matter what I think. What matters in this conversation is what the Chinese think and what they're doing.
Gotcha. And then I've got another question here from Mr. Aries about China that may tie into this. So is China moving back to its imperial structure as it was in the Qing Empire, if I pronounce that right, Qing?
That is never going away.
Yeah.
That's just never going away. And the thing is, there's this great quote by the English historian Jonathan Fenby that China is a civilization disguising itself as a nation, which is really true because China is in this unique position. I think I brought this up in the video where you had this enormous time span of continuity. You have to keep in mind that China for 4,000 years managed to maintain almost the exact same social structures and hierarchies, the exact same cultures and alphabet. Barely anything changed in that time span. Some things changed, but by and large, the social structure remained the same for almost 4,000 years. The Mongols briefly arrived, but the Mongols stayed and became Chinese, basically. And, China became a communist state in the 20th century. But these values, these conservative, traditional Confucian values, they're so powerful and so deeply ingrained within Chinese society that there was simply no way in hell the communists could have just removed them or driven them out of society. And they're re-emerging now. And the communists are adapting to the values of the Chinese population, which is largely grounded in this conservative Confucianism. It's a weird kind of cultural mix where these kind of influences from the old imperial past still play into. Man, I wish I had explained it better in my video, that the Chinese are the Communist Party is kind of wearing the mask of the empire, you could say. They're kind of trying to adopt it or appropriate it to legitimize themselves, because there's simply no way you can just erase 4,000 years of history and claim, okay, we are now completely detached from it. That's simply something that you can't do. So it will always kind of play into whatever government is ruling China.
Okay, and Aries has another question that I think suits the topic. Is the U.S. Or does the U.S. fit the model of an empire? Can we call it an empire? And how might empires look in the future?
That's actually a subject for debate, because if we go by the definition of what an empire was, in the great age of empires, back in the 1800s and the 1700s, the Americans are not an empire. They don't occupy foreign countries. They mostly just bully them into buying American goods and competing with the Americans. Like, this is something that we should never forget. When the British went to war with nations during their age of empire, when economics was involved. It was mainly the British trying to crush foreign economy and to get that foreign economy to buy British goods, right? To take out competition. The Americans don't do that. The Americans, for example, this completely shattered the Germans and the Japanese. But in the New Deal in the post-World War II world, a part of it is that the Japanese can compete with Americans in the American markets, be it in electronics, chemical industry, or in cars. So defining the United States as an empire is a very tricky one. It is something that a lot of people very simply do. You know, there's it's just like the British Empire, blah, blah, blah. It's not. It's really not. And it's a topic of great contention where people far more educated than me can't agree on it.
Okay, and sticking with this list here, I'll tend to some other users' questions here, but while I've got it up in front of me from Aries, he also asks, while we're on the topic of empires, what were in your opinion, the socio-political factors behind the decline of the Roman Republic and the emergence of the empire under Augustus?
I don't know much about that topic. I really don't. I'm very undereducated on the Roman Empire, especially the Roman Republic. I know a little bit about the collapse of the Roman Empire, and when the barbarian hordes, the Germanic hordes and the Huns, or whatever you want to call them, arrived, and the mismanagement of the empire, the corruption, and everything. I know a lot about that, but I don't know much about the Roman Republic. Sorry to say, I'll have to look into that myself.
That's all right. I think it seems like you take a more detailed view of why things fall, not so much the type of views where people try to water them down to one particular factor or the other.
Mhm.
So I appreciate.
There's never a simplistic solution to anything. You should always distrust everyone who has simple answers. Nothing is ever simple.
Gotcha. Okay, and then the Incredible Aspie has a question for you. Do you think that taxation is a moral good or a necessary evil?
I don't make moral judgments. If you want to have a state and finance the state, you need taxes. As simple as that. How much taxes depends on the size of the state. I don't make a moral judgment on that. I'll leave that to Spurgs on the internet.
Well, fair enough. Okay. What country do you think will be the next superpower? And that's from that's from Bra Bra.
Peter Scholler-Tour, he's a German historian who wrote about 20 years ago that he believed that the age of the global superpower was coming into an end, meaning that that we would have two constant blocks, that we would have 2, 3, 4 nations, big, large nations with large navies and nuclear arsenals dominating global politics. He believed that that was coming to an end, and that in the 21st century we would start to see the age of the regional power taking more relevance and dominance. That countries that have a regional geographic or resource or economic based benefit would start becoming more important. And I actually like that idea. I believe we can see that happening throughout many parts of the world. We can see, for example, Argentina and Brazil competing for being the regional power in South America. You can see South Africa and Angola competing for being the regional power in sub-Saharan Africa. You can see Nigeria propping itself up to being a regional power in West Africa. Ethiopia being a region, competing with countries such as what's that name of that country? Eritrea, for being regional power in East Africa. You see these all over the world. Actually, Turkey is going to be in the near future a very dominant regional power in the Mediterranean again, as the Mediterranean becomes geopolitically more relevant and important. If that answers the question, that is, I don't believe that we're going to see the next big, great global superpowers. Of course, the United States and China are going to remain large powers. I think we're going to see a lot more regional powers come up. Smaller countries, not necessarily tiny countries, but countries like France and India. Nah, India is a big one. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have. Japan, maybe Australia, even too, possibly playing a bigger and bigger role in their specific region of the world.
Okay. Let's see. Brubra also asked, what's your opinion, or do you have one specifically on Eastern European politics?
Oh, that's a very broad question.
Yeah, got a couple broad ones coming down.
I think right now there's a lot of misunderstanding. Like, I don't like the word Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
I really don't. Think of it this way: Helsinki is east of Prague. Is Finland Eastern Europe? Stockholm is east of. I think not necessarily east of, but it might actually be at the same longitude as Warsaw. If I don't like the categorization of Eastern Europe as a broad term because it really doesn't make sense, and it's a result of the Cold War. Like, I like classifications like, for example, Danube Europe, because if you follow the banks of the Danube down to the Black Sea from the Alps, you will find that along the Danube, a lot of countries share similarities in culture, in religion, etc., etc. And it's a bit of a weird sounding term. The place, the geographical area between Germany and Russia, which contains Poland and Belarus, is often referred to as the German-Russian corridor, for obvious reasons, because that's where all the invasions kept happening. And that corridor of flat land stretching from Moscow to Berlin, that in itself is its own geographic region also, in my opinion. Like, you can't use Eastern Europe as a classification. But yeah, post-Cold War, in that part of Europe, these parts of Europe, there's a lot of misunderstandings. Like, for example, Poland. You will see a lot of right-wing people praising Poland right now and completely ignoring that what is happening in Poland is actually very dangerous. There have been assassinations of gay activists, etc., etc. It's going down a very right-wing road, and people, especially right-wing political commentators, like to frame Poland's current political situation and climate as like the brave Europeans fighting for European civilization, when the reality is that Poland is a severely traumatized nation that spent the last 400 years under various occupations, subjugations, being enslaved by the Nazis, a world war in which a quarter of its population was wiped out, and a brutal Soviet occupation for almost 60 years. Like, it's a very traumatized nation that is extremely suspicious of outsiders and therefore very susceptible to various nationalistic and xenophobic views of the world. You also have to keep in mind that there was an economic eastward expansion, and that a lot of people in former Eastern Bloc countries used to be extremely poor, and that in the last 20 years, a certain amount of wealth started being acquired, and middle classes started to be built and created in places like Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, something that I will talk about in a future video. There was one big loser in the economic eastward expansion, that is Hungary, which just couldn't get rid of its corruption problem, and consequently still is a comparably poor country. What else can I say about Eastern Europe? Culturally speaking, the term also doesn't necessarily make much sense. Like the term Slav. What is Slavic culture? Like, put a Russian and a Pole into the same room and look at all the differences. Poles, and like religiously speaking, Poles probably have more in religious cultural terms. Poles probably have more in common with Italians and Russians. So yeah, it's an overarching term, Eastern Europe, that doesn't make much sense and is, like I said before, it's a simplification, and things are never simple. You should always look into the details as much as you can.
That's a lot of work, though. Well, if I can give you another broad question, Merck wants to know what your thoughts are on the politics of Latin America. Is that a valid way of drawing a line around people?
Can I not
Yeah.
answer that one because
Sure.
that's the topic of a future video, and I don't want to spoil it because I'm already in the middle of the research and have a lot of exciting things to say about it.
Oh no, that's great. Yeah, definitely. Don't spoil your content if any of the questions are are
Thank you very much.
covering the same things. Um, okay, he actually had another question. Oh, I think yeah. Okay, so that's fine. He had some backups. Do you think it's possible for the U.S. political spectrum to not be skewed to the right in the coming years? And that was also from Mert.
I don't. I don't really make much predictions on U.S. politics. I don't comment much on U.S. politics because I'm not an
Mhm.
American. I don't live there. I'm an outsider. I don't have the kind of insights that many Americans may have. I find the two-party system curious. I find it funny how fragile it actually is. Like from my outsider's perspective, the two-party system it can seem, especially to some Americans, as this monolithic block, but it's in reality really fragile. I believe that a well coordinated third party effort that isn't focused on the presidency but on governors in states could actually undermine the two party system quite efficiently. So, actually. So, yeah, that's probably one of the things I have to say. I don't think that US politics is this monolithic block. It is
Yeah.
very diverse. It is very um, like to give a European comparison, there's this thing called the European Conservative Movement, which is supposed to be this kind of alliance of conservatives across Europe. The same exists for the center left. I think it's called the European Labour Movement. But put a Polish conservative into the same room. No, let's get even more extreme. Put a Greek conservative into the same room with British conservative. They won't stand each other. Put a Spanish conservative into the same room as a Northern German conservative. They won't be able to stand each other. I see that represented in the United States as well. That conservatism, for example, for a New Yorker, means something completely different to what conservatism means to someone in Alabama. It's a very diverse and divergent place, and I believe that many Americans might ignore this kind of political pluralism.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting how kind of rudimentary the two-party system seems to be. I don't know. I think it's probably fairly vulnerable as well. Um, Erwin Rommel asked, "Do you feel that Islamic terrorism is that prevalent of an issue in the grand scheme of things?"
There's a funny thing about that. We'll be talking about terrorism as a general topic in the future. Something that a lot of people don't know is that most terrorist attacks in history, in recent history especially, have not been committed by Islamists but by communists. And that you will even find more terrorist attacks committed by right wing nationalists internationally. In the last 20 years, most terrorist attacks in Europe, definitely in the Middle East, and yeah, in Russia, have been carried out by Islamists. But that is just the current flavor of terrorism. Who knows which other radical ideology may appear again 20 years down the road to brutalize society. The 70s and 80s, especially in Europe, were dominated by right-wing and by communist terrorist attacks. India right now, where people often believe that Islamist terrorism dominates and is that most terrorist attacks are Islamist. That's not true. Most terrorist attacks in India are carried out by the Naxalites, which is a Maoist communist terrorist group. And terrorism as a threat to society is not as dangerous, in my opinion, as Islamist ideology itself. You have to keep in mind terrorism it's really not that all that smart. Like you're blowing yourself up. It's not really a smart way of convincing people of anything. It's not really a smart way to wage war. It's in many ways it's a propaganda tool. Like the first is Sunni Islamist suicide bombers in the Gaza Strip didn't know that they were suicide bombers. They were given bombs with timers by the Hamas officers, and told to go place the bomb at some place in God knows where in Israel, but they were not told that the timer was actually shortened and that they would blow up on the bus to that place.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a kind of devious military tactic. And it's what really scares me more than terrorism are self-segregated ghettos. Like, it's not the people who blow themselves up who scare me as much as it is the hate preacher, the hate cleric, who undermines society, who undermines a community, who builds a self-segregated community that is separate from the other institutions of society. That is far more scary. The terrorism thing is just an extreme. It's the extreme outlier. It's the dangerous outlier. It's dangerous for our security because it can cause not just the deaths and millions in loss in financial, in money, etc., etc. The security apparatus that has to be built to prevent such attack is an enormous cost in society. But it is the ideology behind it that I find more dangerous. I think I went a bit on a ramble here. Sorry for that.
Oh, no, that's interesting. I think this might tie into some of these like reoccurring phenomena. It's like terrorism, like it being just the flavor of the day for it to be Islam. But Arkin was asking, what are your thoughts on? And he's asking me to pronounce something here, so I'll give it a shot. Polybias theory of anacyclosis, translated to the cycle of political revolution.
Can I read that term? Where's the
Yeah,
AMA question?
it's pinned towards the bottom there, if you can view pins. So the cycle of political revolution.
The cycle of political revolution. I've never heard of this.
Hmm.
I need to Google this. Let me see the. Where are you? No, that's not it. God damn
Here,
it!
I'll DM you the term here.
Thank you.
If we want to come back to that one. But yeah, no, I haven't heard that term specifically, but it sounds like it refers to a certain cycle related to revolution. I guess I don't know if we're capable of addressing that specifically. But
I am not going to talk about something that I know nothing about because
gotcha.
the more you do that, the more likely you are to make a fool of yourself. I have not heard that term yet. I'll have to
That's
look it up.
probably a good strategy. But Arkin had some backup questions. Do you think that socialism has been tried?
Has been tried?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not in the
Frequently.
it's never existed yet type of camp, I
Oh, that's just. Oh god.
guess.
I don't want to get into that conversation about what is real socialism and what is real communism. That's a very pointless conversation, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah. Okay, I guess Arkin had a third there. Do you think that we'll see if this one's fieldable here? Do you think that the rise of China and the overthrow of the USA as a world hegemon is possible? If yes, how? So that's kind of tethered to some of our earlier ones there, I guess. But if you feel like you've covered that one enough, we can move on.
That is a very hard one to predict because who knows what the big next geopolitical moves and developments are going to be in the world. Who knows? You know, right now China is basically buying Africa and trying to gain control of it, and not just to, exploit its resources. They're actually building economies there. And they're tying these economies deep into the Chinese economy to create an economic interdependence that will tie Africa deeply into the Chinese economy, just as parts of Far East Asia are tied deeply into the American economy, and how Europe is deeply tied into the American economy. So I think there's some block formation going on right now, but which party comes out at top is hard to predict. Like China. I cut that segment out of my China video because I thought it might be a good topic for next video. China tried very hard to get into the American market and into the South American market. But in South America, it all failed and collapsed into itself. All the investments were failures. Money disappeared in back
Mm.
channels by corrupt politicians. And then many Latin American countries elected right-wing leaders. And in the United States, not going to give away too much because maybe I will still make that video. If you live in the state of Louisiana, you might want to see if there should be some corruption charges brought up against some of your former governors because
Huh.
they seem to be very willing to sell anything that they can sell to the Chinese. And it is very obvious also that the Chinese would like to buy the Texas oil economy up, especially the Odessa refineries in the port of Odessa, because the Texas oil economy is a very important linchpin of the entire US economy.
Well, I guess I'll wait for a video for the rest of the elaboration on that. That sounds pretty interesting. Brassbin wanted to ask you what general time period in history most fascinates you.
The 1800s, the age of colonialism and the beginning of anti-colonialism, the age of nationalism, the age of revolutionaries, the first socialists, the first republics, the first democracies. It's the century that kind of shaped the modern world to a large extent. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. And then Camel Man wants to know why did you switch to Poland Ball specifically?
Because there was another Poland Ball creator who I really enjoyed and watched.
Yeah.
His name was Brain for Breakfast, and he stopped uploading for 8 months, I think. Like, or at least it was a very long time, 6 months or something, that he didn't upload a video. I was confused by it. I was like wondering, did he stop? Was he gone? And then it turns out that no, he actually had died.
Oh
And
man.
and that his content was not going to happen anymore. And that upset me. And I sat on that for 2 months. And then I just randomly at one point decided to make a video using country balls like he did. And it just continued from there, I guess.
Well, it's definitely some good content, so I'm glad you picked the torch back up.
Thank you.
Camel Man had a couple other ones that he posted. He wanted to know how strong is Russia actually in your eyes?
It's a
So
paper
yeah,
tiger. It's a paper tiger.
it's a
Russia's
paper tiger.
Yes, Russia, a paper bear, it would be a better formulation.
Yeah.
Russia's strength is in its entirety built on the perception of its strength. It's not a very strong country. It has a very dilapidated military, a very corrupt political leadership, but it is an expert at sowing confusion through intelligence services and presenting itself as stronger than what it actually is. Very good at that. The entire Russian intervention in Syria, for example, was just this very short go in, bomb a few things, go out, because the Russians couldn't afford to stay in Syria. Because if they would, it would have risked turning into basically their Iraq war. And if that would have happened, the consequences would have been disastrous for them. Like, they're very, very good at presenting themselves as stronger than what they actually are. And, well, geopolitically, they don't hold many trump cards. You know, they lost the large geopolitical buffer that used to be Ukraine and Belarus and Eastern Poland, which protected them from invasions. Russia is its land, right? A lot of people don't know that the Russian core, its lands, is mostly swamps, fields and swamps. Hellscape of mosquitoes during the summer, and completely frozen over during the winter. It's a harsh land, very harsh land, with a very, that I guess one could say, produced a very harsh people and a very rough culture. And and the one trump card it does hold, however, is that it sits on massive natural gas reserves and that it can hold that over Europe, as Europe is dependent on those reserves, but at the same time, Russia has nobody else to sell them to. But yeah, overall, it's a lot weaker than you may think. It's not as strong a country as you may want to believe. The Russians want you to believe that they are a global superpower, but they're not really necessarily anymore.
Gotcha. Camel Man had a couple of other questions. Let's see. What's a place in the world that you think is least talked about but is still incredibly important?
The stands, Central Asia.
The stand.
Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan. The stands, the Central Asian countries sitting on massive gas reserves, ruled by crazy dictators who wish to sell their massive energy reserves and are kind of a struggling ground for conflict between various countries, from Turkey to Russia to India to China.
Sorry, I got to read a question here. From Johnny Milos here. On the topic of regional powers, do you think the formation of the East African Federation will make any big changes in the geopolitical scenario for Africa, if you're aware of it at all?
There have been various attempts by various regional African blocs to create unions and confederations, and especially in West Africa, along the Gold Coast, they have always failed. They have always failed. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one fails too, to be honest.
Okay, and that one was actually from Phantasbolic, so sorry about that. That one, Johnny just wanted to make sure got in.
I should say, in the past, they failed out of ideological reasons, right? But right now that most African countries are becoming wealthier, they're economic self-interest reasons. Botswana, for example, is a tax haven in sub-Saharan Africa. It's north of South Africa. It's becoming increasingly wealthy. It will probably be soon one of the wealthier countries in the world. And they have absolutely no reason and no interest into joining any kind of shared economic confederacy. They want to keep their wealth. So that's why some of these unions may fail.
Okay. And then Camel had one question at the end there, Camel Man. What books would you recommend to learn about how geography shapes conflict?
Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall.
All right.
I
And
could give
then-
you another one if you want.
Sure.
Revenge of Geography by God damn it, that's embarrassing. I forgot the author.
Revenge of Geography.
By let me see in my bookcase. Fuck. Yeah. Where do I have it? Okay.
We can post it up later if you'd like.
Yeah, I can't
Evading
find
you.
If you need to Google the book, you will find the author. The title is just Revenge of Geography. I can't find it in my case right now. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay, Dumb Step wanted to know if you have an opinion on Bismarck's politics.
I think it was very detrimental in terms of for the Germany that he left behind. In particular, founding a new German state on what was basically a humiliation of France. And basically, celebrating being German, the German national holiday became the day of humiliation of France because of him. Being German became kind of associated with humiliating France. And as you know, and as you can imagine, that led to almost inevitable future conflict. I think it was a disaster. It's one of the main reasons the First World War happened. Okay.
Alrighty. Let's see. Esso's got a fun one here. What do you think will happen when politics extends to other planets?
The same thing that happened when we colonized the Americas. I'm convinced of that one. If we were to ever actually colonize Mars, I believe within 1 or 2 centuries, the settlers there would declare independence. I'm convinced of that. There's this famous line from Jefferson where he argued the case for why the United States should declare itself independent from Britain, and just one simple sentence, but it's so true. It's an island cannot rule a continent. And from that perspective, if we ever get to actually colonize other planets, a country cannot rule a planet.
Hmm, that's interesting. We've got another future-based one if you're ready for it.
Sure.
Uh, Jane the Bane wants to know what you think the impact of automation will be on first world economies.
That's a controversial one because my opinion is that automation isn't as much of a threat to society or as a thing than most people believe. I believe that every innovation creates new jobs in its stead. I believe that education in general is constantly on the rising, and that future generations will always be more educated than the previous ones, and therefore what is today's highly educated job might be a lesser educated job in the near future. So I think it's a very overrated thing. I don't think it is as dramatic as Andrew Yang would, for example, put it.
Being a bit overblown.
Mhm.
Okay. Stalto wanted to ask you, what is your opinion on the philosophy of classical liberalism and how it is being twisted by both the left wing, in quotes, to make it look more negative, and the right wing, in quotes, to make the extreme ideals look palatable?
In about half a year from now, I will be making a 12-part video series, each video about an hour long, which will explain what liberalism is, because that's something that none of the people who call themselves classical liberals or claim to know what it is ever did. Like actually explain what it is. I think that the word liberal is so widely used and abused these days that it is necessary. This is something that I came to a conclusion with a friend who will help me make these videos, that it is something where we just have to sit down and just go through it again and explain what it is. Yeah.
Okay. And then Nove wants to know, and this may be retreading some of the same ground, but can you see the far right getting any bigger, more powerful in Europe specifically in the near future? And do you plan to analyze the current situation with European neo-Nazis in a future video?
No, I'm no longer going to comment on the extremist right and the political far right in many European countries. If you haven't noticed, completely humiliated themselves. In Austria, they I don't know if you heard that in the news. The leader of the far right party was secretly recorded trying to sell national assets to a Russian billionaire. Um,
Oh wow,
doesn't
I
go
didn't
over
see that.
well. Yeah. In Italy, they turned out to be completely inefficient and didn't know how to run a state, basically. And when it comes to the very extremist, undemocratic movements, they are constantly destroying themselves. Look at Generation Identity, whose leader made a deal with a terrorist and then took money from a terrorist and then lied to the authorities about it. You can't just do that in the post 9/11 world. It's just I think they're going to be irrelevant again very soon. Like, I don't think that Nazism, it was once a thing in the 90s, for example, and I was surprised that it came up again 5 years ago. I think it's going to disappear again for another 10 years and then maybe reappear. Who knows?
Well, hopefully, at least.
Mhm.
Uh, and then Alec wanted to know what you thought of the Italo-German relationship,
I don't know much about that. Sorry.
if that makes sense. All right. Well, we can field a different one then. What do you think? Or sorry, RED wants to know, what do you think Australia specifically should do in the face of growing Chinese expansionism? Do you think Australia will be able to maintain its full sovereignty if aligned with China?
Um, they should implement and pass the anti-corruption motion and bill that was rejected. I think it was 3 years ago, because that was an amazing law that would have done a lot to combat corruption in Australia. Like that's something that Australians like. The way China sought to gain influence in Australia was by simply bribing politicians, to be honest, but buying their way into it. And the simplest things that Australians could do right now is just pass strict anti-corruption bills and measures.
Okay. Would you ever consider? Joel provides wants to know. Would you ever consider debating Carl Benjamin on some of his views?
Yeah, maybe in the future sometime. I don't feel like debating other people right now. I feel like making videos first and foremost. The last debate I did with another YouTuber was a shit show. I left a very sour taste, and I didn't really enjoy it. So yeah, I might not do that for a while.
Yeah, it seems like that would be a challenging thing to have come out quite how you want. Yeah.
It's not that. It's I'll be honest with you, all of you here. A lot of what you see is phony. Like, I'm gonna be very frank about that. A lot of what you see on what is called YouTube debates is very phony. There are no true debates on YouTube. A debate is you have a moderator and you have two people who have a position. Every person, every one of the two gets to make a 10-minute opening statement, then a 5-minute counterpoint, followed by the other person doing a 5-minute counterpoint, then by another 5-minute counterpoint, and another 5-minute counterpoint. That's how debates go. They're very strictly regulated. People make their case. There's actually kind of sometimes not even a winner in the end. It's just cases being made. What you have on YouTube is mostly screaming matches, and people are willing to go to some very nasty lengths to do that. I was in one of the recent debates I was on, debates and air quote, the guy who invited me on DM'd me that he wanted to debate this topic and that I should prepare for it. And I did. And when I came on his stream, he ambushed me with a completely different topic,
Wow.
confrontationally, because he wanted to get that, that sweet YouTube wrecked point, that win, which is really just worthless if we're being honest. And from, I don't feel that I don't really want to engage in any YouTube debates in this kind of environment. I would like to have a real debate environment for that, and not these pedantic, silly screaming matches.
Yeah, that kind of toxicity definitely doesn't seem to be good for anybody, especially when they're dropping things on you out of left field. That kind of dishonesty doesn't
Yeah,
seem
it's
a
it's
good way
it's
to go.
also deceiving. It's also deceiving the audience by and large.
Yeah.
It's WWE. It's acting. It's acted out fighting.
uh, let's see. Zorro wants to know. El Zorro wants to know: have you always had the same political beliefs as you do now? And if not, when and why did they change to what they are now?
I used to be an anarchist when I was younger. I gave that up when I went into my late teens, so about 19, 20 years old. That's when I gave it up. Then when I started drifting more into a social democratic liberal position, politically speaking, center left. But yeah, I used to be a radical left-wing anarchist.
All right. Azarelo, not really sure how to pronounce that one, wants to know. They say they're genuinely curious about how you research the subjects you discuss and how you form the opinions you present. And they say you can address that in as much detail as you'd like.
Um, a good place to start is to read the Wikipedia article on a topic, a general just over-reading of it. But don't use the Wikipedia article as a source. Then go look at, who the experts cited are. Look at who these experts who were cited are. Take a look at if they wrote any books, then buy those books. And there's also no shame in just asking a university professor if they recommend, like going into a lecture by someone or reading into the book list of a certain professor's lectures. I prefer reading books. Like, every video I now make requires me to read at least 2 books for the video to be made. I want my videos to be informative, and informative beyond the Wikipedia article. I don't want to be one of those YouTubers who just reads Wikipedia to you. Okay.
Yeah, so that sounds like a lot of work. I definitely appreciate it in the videos I've been watching from you.
Thank you.
Nico wanted to say that she loves your videos and has been a long time fan, and she's been looking more into foreign policy lately. The question is, what are your thoughts on offensive realism/realism as a political thought? And how do you think Europe should act in terms of foreign policy in combating Russia and China, either by economic means or other forms? Again, love the content. Keep up the good work.
Offensive realism. That's that neocon idea, right? The idea that you have to prepare for the unknown unknowns. And that it's best to be on the attack against any potential threat. Phew. Is it? Because I'm not entirely sure.
I'm not familiar with that concept. I might have to Google that one.
I'm looking at it right now. Let me just read the first. Offensive realism is a structural theory belonging to the neo-realist school of thought put forward by John Mearsheimer in response to defensive realism. Offensive realism holds that the anarchic nature of the international system is responsible for the promotion of aggressive state behavior. Yeah, I would agree with that. That's a point I tried to get across in my American interventionalism video, that the world without America would be a lot more anarchic, a lot more that dictatorships don't abide by the same rules as democracies in foreign policy and are more aggressive and will take advantage more of weaknesses within foreign nations. Yeah, I would agree with that one. Like, I am, in my personal politics, very hawkish. I've completely advocate to be as aggressive as possible towards non-democratic countries. So yeah, I think I would agree with that, but I haven't heard of the term offensive realism yet. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that addresses that at least somewhat. And then Salty Peanut wants to know, is there any advice you'd give to someone attempting to grow their own channel? I'm assuming on YouTube.
I like the use of the name Salty Peanut. That definitely works. That would definitely work. Well, it depends on what kind of content you want to make. How about you shoot me a DM and send me some of your videos, and we can talk about this. If you want, I can show you a few, show you which editing programs I use and how I edit mine. I could give you advice on that, and I can share your videos around in my server and on my Twitter and wherever. Simple things can help people out a lot. Like, yeah, I'll gladly help you out with that.
Well, that's generous.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Speaking of generous, I see that in the chat is PP Dude. He's a YouTuber who makes videos just like mine on geopolitics, geography, and history. You should check him out. It's PP Dude. PPDUDE. It's Politics and Paint is the name of his channel. Just wanted to throw that in.
Politics and Paint. Well, and being that we're hitting an hour here, let me take a second to mention, if anybody's joining now, if they want a question to be asked, they can post that in the AMA questions channel. So make sure to put those there if you want them to be asked. And okay, yeah, and we've got a link to Kraut's channel there as well. Oh, sorry, to P. Okay, gotcha. So there's also a link for PP Dude in the channel as well. Okay, and then another question here from FOPA. What made you go from the political comment sphere to geopolitics? Emphasis on country ball. So
the absolute stupidity of the culture war.
The stupidity of the culture war.
Yeah, no, I watch people like Tim Pool, and several others, like left and right wing. I look at people like Tim Pool and Philosophy Tube and all these people, and I just scratch my head in confusion and just, what the fuck am I even watching? Like, I don't get this. I don't get making a half an hour rambling rant about the headline in the newspaper. Like, the content that you find in Culture War YouTube, specifically in the Writer Center, is mostly just people reading articles to you. Like, it's literally just, let me read the news to you, and I don't want to do that. I find that so stupid. I can't get behind that. I find it uninformative. I find it silly. I find it almost parasitic. because you're living off what other journalists write, or what stupid hacks in some papers write. And then on the left, you have this weird development. You have people who are almost a mirror image of the people who they oppose. Vaush, for example, is basically just the Sargon of left-wing YouTube. He's a streamer. You know, and I recently started watching someone called PhilosophyTube, who is apparently this great left-wing intellectual. And I watched this last video, which was 40 minutes long. I spent 20 minutes talking about how much he likes himself and how much he likes the women who DM him. And it's just what does that have to do with politics? Like that's the reason why I wanted to escape the culture war. This entire SJW versus anti-SJW, conservative, the social politics, how leftist is Star Wars, how degenerate are furries, and all this nonsense. I wanted to escape that, and I'm so happy I did, because it's just nonsense. At least I had this moment like a half a year ago where I realized, holy shit, I'm wasting my time here. This is garbage. What am I doing? And that's why I make the videos I make now. Yeah.
Gotcha. Took a step outside there. Stalto wanted to know, and this might be connected. Do you think that just as in the far right, do you think the far left is getting more radical and powerful?
The far right. Wait, sorry, I zoomed out.
Oh, sorry. Did I say it twice? Is the far left becoming more radical and powerful, similarly to the far right?
Well, that's the thing. If you live on the internet, that's a very weird way of saying it. If you live on the internet, like most culture warriors do, you might get that perception that the enduring defining conflict of our age is between SJWs and those who oppose it. That's complete horseshit.
Yeah.
Twitter is no representation of the politics of the world, let alone the United States. How many people actually have a Twitter account in the United States? What, like 12% of the population? Or maybe even less? This stuff doesn't represent real politics. It doesn't. And that's something that I hope to show people with the videos I'm making now. Yeah.
Yeah, it does definitely seem to captivate our attention too often.
Yeah.
Okay. The pro-European Union human wants to know, what's your opinion of the federalization of the EU?
I'm very opposed to federalization. I would sign off on confederation, like, I don't know, a European Union that is built like Switzerland. That is something that I could sign off to, but I would be very opposed to federalization. I think that would be a disaster.
All right. Humble Hat wants to know what you think of the USA's global involvement, particularly in the very recent trade war.
Mm-hmm. I have a very pragmatic view. Like, I don't like what Trump was doing. I think his foreign policy is just one gigantic disaster. But like looking back in like the 50 years and evaluating and trying to determine the value of US foreign policy, you can't deny that the United States is a global police force, a country that enforces its vision of what the world should be on many other countries. If it is an empire or not, that is something that we can discuss, but I'm not willing to make a deterministic statement on it. And when trying to make a value judgment on that, the one thing I have to say is I take a very pragmatic approach, which is I prefer a world policed by the US over a world policed by the Soviet Union or communist China. It's really as simple as that. And I also often have to point out that people often forget, for some reason, that other global powers have had just as aggressive a foreign policy. People, for example, forget how many foreign coups and foreign interventions were organized by the Soviet Union, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. That China went to war with almost every single one of its neighbors in the first 20 years of its existence as a communist state. The US isn't the only country in the world doing foreign interventions. Did you know that Cuban troops fought in Angola?
No.
Yes, Cuban during the Cold War. Cuba, the Soviet Union sent pilots and tanks, and the Cubans sent soldiers. And the Americans hired South African mercenaries to fight a civil war in Angola.
Really?
Yeah, like it shows you that global interventions are not just conducted by the Americans. There are many countries that often play into them. Okay.
All right. Let's see. Edginas wants to know what you think of direct democracy or semi-direct democracy, like in Switzerland.
Switzerland is not a direct democracy. It is practically speaking, but the correct term for what Switzerland is a confederacy. It's a confederate state, a confederate nation, and it's not. It's not really the people. Well, constitutionally speaking, power doesn't reside with the people, but by the states. And many states just decided to go with the direct democracy model. And if you want to pass a bill federally, an easy way of circumventing, the entire state mechanism with all the various states in the confederacy is to do a direct large referendum. What I think of it is it's a very slow governing process. It's extremely slow. Reforms barely ever get done. You have to keep in mind Switzerland is the last country in Europe to give women the right to vote, for example. Reforms happen slowly, extremely slowly. It is a secure and hard to undermine system of government. It's very unlikely to collapse into dictatorship, but it is incredibly slow. Okay.
It definitely seems like a hard thing to balance out, how fast you can react, how stable it is.
Yeah. Switzerland could literally never go to war. It could literally never go to war with a country because they would have to hold a referendum on it.
Yeah.
Yes, what is the point of that? It's just warning your enemy that you're about to go to war with them, basically. It's
I guess. Yeah, I guess abstaining from war is good most of the time, as long as you can avoid it, I guess. He had a second question, Edgy Nas, that what type of music do you listen to?
I could open up my music playlist if I can find it. Let me find my playlist and just read through. Like I listen to music mainly while I work. Oh god damn it, why is this loading so long? I listen to a lot of classic, mainly Russian classic in that regard. A lot of 80s stuff. Like this nostalgic remixes as well of current tracks. Yeah, I have a very varied taste in music. I used to be a lot into crust punk and grindcore when I was younger, and metal music, but I grew out of that. And it's a lot varied now. Like what I listen to can vary dramatically. Okay.
Do you listen to any of it while you research, or you try and leave that separate?
Well, yeah, I need background noise while I work. Like you will probably see me hop into the voice chat of this server here and then if I notice that people are having a conversation that I could listen to, because I need to listen to something while I work. I can't work without listening to something. Just doesn't work that way with me.
Gotcha. All right. Let's see. Duchenne's wants to know, and this seems like a multi-parter here. What's your opinion on the protests of Hong Kong, the Western response to it, and the actions of Germany, for example, the rejection of the HK support bill in particular?
Well, there's nothing that we can do about it anymore because the fate of Hong Kong was decided in 1998 when the British handed it over. That was it. Like, that was the moment that it was signed. There's nothing you can do.
The end.
There's nothing. Yeah, legally speaking, there's nothing you can do. It will be interesting to observe that in Hong Kong, every citizen born before the year 2000 has a right to British citizenship. And it will be interesting to see how many Hong Kongers will move to Britain over the next couple of years. But, politically, geopolitically, legally, there's not much we can do anymore. the initial mistake was not giving Hong Kong to Taiwan. You know.
Yeah. And then let's see. Connected to that question from Duchenne's, what do you think should be the future path for Hong Kong and the West in regard to Hong Kong? So is that,
Like
I
I
guess,
said,
is there
there's
anything
nothing we
to
can do. There's
Nothing to be
nothing
done.
we can hope for the Chinese communist state to collapse. But other than that, there's not really much you can do, I think.
All right. And so PP Dude, your fellow YouTuber there, wants to know what your opinion is on China's new Silk Road. And
I'm
do
still
you
reading up on that. I'm still
Oh,
reading up on it.
gotcha.
It's a really interesting one because the Silk Road became kind of irrelevant when we discovered deep sea navigation, right? When we conquered the oceans and
Mhm.
turned the oceans into free highways. And if the Chinese would reopen the Silk Road, they would have to find a way to conquer land again, to reconquer land, to reinvent transport by land. And I'm really interested in seeing how they will do that and by which means they intend to do that. Like they're building these massive highways and high-speed rail lines, but I'm really interested in seeing if these are really going to be more efficient than container ships.
Well,
And
and to do his question some service too, he wanted to know kind of specifically, do you think it will succeed in building a wider Chinese sphere of influence, or will it collapse under its own financial weight and its exploitive policies?
it would definitely draw some countries deeper into the Chinese economy. It will definitely be of great benefit to some countries, especially the stands in Central Asia. But it also came with consequences. Like this is something that you will see in my next video, the part 2 of the Turkey video. For the Silk Road, the new Road project to work, China needs a cooperative Turkey. And Turkey is taking massive advantage of that and is constantly bullying China on the international stage.
Hmm.
Especially over its treatment of the Uyghurs. So it can be a bit of a disadvantage for China too in the future.
All right. All right. And Stelto wants to know what your opinion is on Cuba attempting to expand its sphere of influence by propping up
Well,
dictatorships in Latin America through the Sao Paulo Forum.
that's a funny one, isn't it? That 10 years ago, you would have probably asked me what I thought about Venezuela propping up Cuba. But now it's the other way around, isn't it? I don't think Cuba has much power to prop up anyone. It's a barely functioning socialist, almost collapsing state. There's not much there for it to prop up, is there? I think it tried very heavily during the Cold War, especially to influence politics in Latin America. But with the end of the Soviet Union, the means to do so were no longer there. And you should not forget that a lot of Latin American countries are highly suspicious of Cuba and of Cuban influence. Very highly suspicious. Because they remember the guerrilleros who were sent to their countries, especially, for example, in Colombia, where Cuba for decades propped up the FARC. A lot of Colombians have no time and no interest for Cuba and are very suspicious of Cuba. So I don't think Cuba has as much influence as you may think. I'm pretty sure the Chinese at this point have influence in Latin America than Cuba.
Hmm. Okay. Let's see. Ardma wants to know, what do you think is going to happen if Iran makes a nuclear bomb?
That's the $1 million question. Two options. Either they're crazy enough to use it, which some might be. There's speculation over that. You have to keep in mind that the former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, was part of a Shia sect that believed that humans needed to start the apocalypse for the return of Muhammad and the 12th Imam, which is a scary thing, Keep in mind that you literally believe human beings must start the apocalypse, and that guy wanted to have a nuke. So there's that question.
Oh wow.
The other option is, of course, that it will be like with North Korea, that the Americans will have to come to some kind of appeasing agreement with them. Those are basically the two options.
Gotcha.
It won't happen, by the way. I am
It won't
pretty
happen?
sure. I am pretty sure that the nuclear reactors and facilities in Iran are more likely to mysteriously blow up than there ever being a nuclear bomb in Iran. Yeah.
All right, that's good to know. Let's see. Salty Peanut wants to know what your opinion is of banana republics.
Very outdated term.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the first banana republic was what was the name of the country? It was in the Brazil, the dark horse in the Brazilian World Cup. God damn it. That's embarrassing that I don't remember the name of a country. Costa Rica was the first banana republic. Costa Rica. Because, yeah, the way it came to be was that the Americans bought the banana plantations in that country, chopped down the jungles, made massive banana plantations, and then basically used the massive profits they made to influence the government. In that term, you can use the banana republic term for a lot of states, can't you? You could use it, for example, for Saudi Arabia. No, not necessarily. I don't think American finance has a lot of influence in Saudi Arabia. Which country might be similar? Ukraine, for a very long time, was Russia's banana republic, but the relationship was not as much around bananas as it was as natural gas. It's something that is probably a lot more common than people think. It's not a Latin American thing. When resource dependence in the economy of a country leads to that country becoming subverted by another power. Yeah, it's probably more common than people believe it is. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. So Webley or Weebly wants to know. He wants to repeat some questions from a Patreon post last year. What's your opinion on the current state of, and I don't know how to pronounce this, but Bundsweer? Am I saying that remotely correct? Let's see. Bundeswehr.
Never heard of that.
All right. I'll jump to the next one. Okay.
Bundeswehr, the German army. I stated before that. I stated before that the German army is very underfunded, very under-equipped, and very dilapidated. And I believe it should be modernized, brought up to being on a similar status like the British army or the French army, to actually play a role in international affairs.
All right. And then Weebly had some secondary questions. What do you think European nation, or do you think European nations should engage in intervention operations by themselves instead of being part of a major coalition?
They already do. They already do. There are currently French troops fighting in West Africa and East Africa. There are Portuguese troops fighting in West Africa. There are Italian aircraft carriers patrolling North Africa. They already do. Like, there is European nations that have armies don't wait for American approval. They just do their interventions anyway. There's just far less media attention on them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think he acknowledged that in part of his question there. The French in Western Africa. He had another part to the question. What is your opinion on the usage of PMCs and mercenaries in war?
Very negative. I don't think you should privatize warfare. It turns into a looting hellhole if you do that. People who fight for money are less, I guess, are more inclined to commit war crimes than people who fight for, serving the country, a higher ideal, I guess you could say. Yeah, I'm very, like, it's probably in relation to Blackwater that you're asking this, and how Dick Cheney hired mercenaries to do a lot of the operational management in Iraq. That was a terrible idea. That was an absolutely terrible idea. And it shouldn't have been done. Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely concerning for me as far as money's involvement in war in general. But do you? And this is also part of Weebly's question here. Do you have any patriotic feelings from being German/Austrian?
No, it's a weird thing with me because my family is split up between 4 countries. Like, it's my family tree is a mix of English, uh, Austrian, German, and Polish, but nobody speaks Polish anymore. And I've lived in 3 countries. I spent my childhood, my teens, and my adult life living in 3 countries, in the UK, in Germany, and in Austria, moving between them frequently. And what happens if you spend your childhood living in 3 countries and moving every few years is that you don't just become tied to one particular place emotionally and identity-wise, but to all of them. Like, I would describe it. I know people. I have friends in my social circles who grew up the same way. You kind of get a feeling of being constantly homesick, where if you're in this country, you miss those things from the other country. You know, so it's a weird thing that I guess happens to people who were raised as a child of multiple cultures. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Fast Turtle wanted to know what is the worst. Oh, sorry, one second. What's the worst thing that has happened, in your opinion, of from the current lockdown and pandemic beyond just the people who have actually died from the pandemic?
The economic consequences, they are going to be absolutely severe. The wealth inequality after this is over is going to be huge. It's going to be massive. There's there's going to be a very small group of people after this who own a substantial amount of wealth in the world. As it's going to be frightening. It's going to be very frightening. Okay.
Yeah, that definitely seems like it has the potential to be pretty destabilizing for
Yeah.
societies across the world. Um, let's see. Hermes wanted to know, what do you have any predictions for the future of the Middle East?
No. Okay, I'll go out on a limb and say one. I believe that the Turks will become the predominant regional power of the Middle East.
Oh wow.
I do genuinely believe that neo-Ottomanism is something that people take very little serious right now, but will be increasingly confronted with in the next few decades. I like the Turks, from what I've observed and from what I've read, they're basically playing the long game. They're just watching the Saudis and the Iranians slaughter each other, and bit by bit, they're just nibbling away at their spheres of influence and grabbing stuff for themselves very slowly, very patiently. They're playing a long game there, and I believe that the Middle East will, in the near future, will be, yeah, a Turkish sphere of influence.
Did that feeling become stronger as you did research for the Turkish Century video?
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Especially in the last 20 years. Yeah.
Okay. Arkin wanted to know, what are your thoughts on gun rights?
Yeah, I'm very pro-gun. Basically, yeah. I believe people should be free to own firearms. Yeah.
Simple
Simple,
enough.
simple as that.
Alrighty. Let's see. Alex the Great wanted to know. Let's see how he put this here. What caused your apparent hatred of Jordan Peterson?
It's not a hatred. I just don't like his ideas.
Yeah.
I find his philosophy. I don't think you can even call it a philosophy because it's built on self-help.
Yeah.
Self-help is not a philosophy. You can literally do that with any ideology. You know, you can say, improve yourself, clean your room to be a better communist, clean your room to be a better Nazi, clean your room to be a better socialist, clean your room to be a better. It's not a philosophy. It's not. I find it very vapid and empty. It's as simple as that.
Gotcha. Clean your room to be a better Nazi.
Yeah.
um. All right, I'll have to keep that one in mind. Slovene Pepe wants to know what's your opinion on Slovenia?
The small Balkan nation, the first one to split off from Yugoslavia. I think
Not much
yeah,
more to say.
the Italians really wanted to annex it after the First World War and before the First World War, and had to be bullied into giving that idea up. I don't know much about Slovenia. I should probably look into it. It's a very popular holiday destination here recently. So it's not that far from where I live, actually. Let me take a look. Yeah, 12-hour train ride. No, 10-hour train ride. Yeah, I might actually go then. Try it, and then I'll try to find out more. But I don't know much about your country, unfortunately. Okay. Sorry.
No. All right. So next one, Shamalama wants to know, and I don't know what this stands for, so feel free to skip this one if you don't. But your thoughts on the AFD and FPO. Also, what you think of proportional representation style governments such as Germany or Israel's.
I prefer that. I prefer the multiple party parliamentary system. And I am not an AFD supporter by any means, but I welcomed it when they finally arrived because Germany had a very unified right and a very divided left. The German left is divided up between three parties: the Greens, the Social Democrats, and the Left, which is a party that is simply called the Left. The Left is a Marxist, more radical party. The Greens are a very leftist, environmentalist party, and the Social Democrats are a centre-left party. And the Conservatives have always been, throughout the last decades, this one consolidated bloc. And because of that, they were more frequently in power. And I'm very happy that they're now siphoning off votes to a far-right party that is now existing in Germany. Because I think that will make politics more pluralistic and interesting. Even though I don't support the AFD, I want to underline that. I welcomed their arrival because I wanted to see the Conservatives split up into a centre-right and a far-right. And on the FPÖ in Austria, they're a joke party at this point. I mentioned earlier how they got basically kicked out of government for being corrupt idiots. Incompetent and corrupt idiots, yeah?
Oh, okay, that was the party you were talking about
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
righty. Let's see. Pickle Johnny wants to know, do you think that cultural Marxism is an actual thing?
No.
No.
It like the term as it's used right now, right, is a conspiracy term. But there is actually something that you could call cultural Marxism, which is in the Eastern Bloc, the nostalgia and the preservation of certain Soviet era and communist era buildings, architectures, traditions. Like there is a Marxist culture, which is kind of funny because it goes contrary to what Marxism is about. But because there were communist states who implemented traditions and etc. within their societies, you now have these like weird communist cultural things. Yeah.
All right. And then here, let's see. This one might be a fun one. China number one wants to
Mm.
know, why did you change your YouTube profile picture into a picture of a bird? Is there a deeper meaning to it, or did you lose a bet?
There's a funny meaning to it. Should I explain it?
If you
You
feel
might
like
be. As a funny little side interest of mine, I like to watch the most, let me just put it like that, the most retarded, idiotic, stupid, dumbest things you can find on YouTube. One of my favorite channels is a neo-Nazi obese alcoholic who rambles about the Jews and black people and mistakenly streamed his Pornhub profile where he asks where he hopelessly DMs black porn stars if they would fuck him. I like watching trash like that on YouTube, like just complete trash. And the parrot that I used as a profile picture is from such a trash YouTube channel. Just
All right,
and when
all
I
right. I love that
yeah,
answer. Yeah,
and
that's
when I saw that parrot, I just burst out laughing. If you want, you can ask me to explain the parrot more. It's just from a trashy YouTube channel. And it made me laugh for 20 minutes, and I just decided then to use it as my profile.
gotcha.
Like,
Forgive me if I don't link that YouTube channel afterwards
no.
here.
Well, most of
Uh,
them only have 500 subscribers or something like that. I just watched them to amuse myself. It's like it's paranoia, not paranoia. Sorry, poverty porn. It's a German genre of TV. Yeah, where you just watch the most reprehensible weirdos do the dumbest fucking things.
just spectacles.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Eska Potato wants to know, what do you think on the government of Rojava? Is it
Rojava.
Rojava?
I interviewed Rojava is Kurdish northern Syria.
Oh,
I
okay.
interviewed an American, an Iraq war veteran on my channel. I unlisted the video though, who went to Iraq to fight with a Kurdish militia as a volunteer against ISIS. And he told me in that interview that the most likely thing to happen with Rojava is that it will either get bombed out of existence by the Turks, or that it will break into a civil war with the Kurds of Iraq. Because Rojava it's a communist entity, an anarchist entity at some places as well. And what people often forget or don't even know is that the Kurds of Syria and the Kurds of Iraq absolutely don't get along. The Kurds of Iraq are building a secular republic. And don't want anything to do with this communist stuff in Syria right now. I believe Rojava will be short-lived. What will come after it, I don't know. I hope Assad doesn't get his fingers on it, and I hope that the Turks don't get their fingers on it, because I think the consequences would be disastrous for the Kurdish people there. But I don't see a bright future ahead for that particular part of northern Syria.
All right. Let's see. Alex the Great would like to know, what can we do to combat tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, Tariq Nasheed, and their followers without falling into some pseudo-Maoist re-education scheme?
Ignore them and make the videos that inform people based on facts. Just ignore them. Laugh at them, make fun of them, make memes of them. Like I never understood people who even took Alex Jones serious.
What's pretty straightforward.
Oh yeah, just what's that guy again called? The black nationalist. We arrived here in slave ships and we will leave in spaceships.
Oh yeah.
Tariq Nasheed. Yeah, I just laugh at that guy. It's just ridiculous. That's really all you can do. Laugh and inform people adequately.
Gotcha. That sounds yeah. Straightforward. Stick to the facts. All right, let's see. Electrior wants to know, do you support American intervention in the Middle East specifically?
What? Sorry?
Do you support American intervention in the Middle East?
It depends on who.
Yeah.
Depends on who. I think Obama made a mistake when he didn't overthrow Assad. That's controversial, I know, but I think Assad should have been kicked out. Yeah. I think the Americans should end their alliance with the Saudis as soon as they possibly can.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think that there's any better example of a country, of an ally that betrayed its allies so much as the Saudis did the Americans. There's no reason for the Americans to continue it.
All right. Let's see. Shamalama wants to know when you let's see. when you moved to Austria?
2 years ago? No, 3 years ago. 2.5 years. 2.5 years. Yeah. I had a girlfriend back then who wanted to move to Austria, or at least I talked it through with her. The option was there, so we decided to go.
All right. Joel Provides wants to know, will you ever do a video on Ireland like you did on Turkey?
Yes. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Just be patient. My videos take longer to make. If I can, I'm saving up my Patreon earnings right now to buy better editing and animation software. Once that's done, and I'm eventually going to build a full-on video studio as well. Once I'm there, I will be able to make videos faster. But you have to be content with the fact that it takes me a month or up to 2 months to make a video at this point, because they're long. I don't like making short videos anymore, and because I want to have them as well researched as possible.
Okay. And this one ties to your future videos as well here from Shamalama. So feel free to skip this one if it's going to cover, content that you're looking to put in a video later. But he was wondering, from your research so far, do you believe that the problems in Mexico also apply to Central America?
Yes, to all of Latin America. To all of it, with maybe the exception of Uruguay. In terms of future video ideas, I should probably put this out there. I post a list of videos that I want to make in the near future. If you scroll down in the YouTube community tab, you should find a link to a PDF. I post it every time I finish a video. I post a link to the list of ideas.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Let's see. China #1 wants to know, do you think Japan will ever regain its status as the strongest economy in Asia?
I don't think it will. Well, that's a completely different question.
Yeah.
It's not just going to. Well, I think the more interesting one is it going to regain its status as a military power?
Mm.
Something. Did you know that Japan has 2 aircraft carriers? Did you know?
No.
It's funny. Not officially. Officially, they built these 2 aircraft carriers, which are obviously aircraft carriers, but they call them helicopter rescue ships, even though they have no helicopters on them and are obviously meant for jet
Really?
fighters. Like, yeah, the Japanese are already building a modern, large army. They're just waiting for the moment where they can. I think there's really an interest in the wider Japanese public doesn't want to be a military power anymore. Doesn't want to be a power player, a regional one. But there's a political elite in Japan that wants to be a regional power player again, and they're driving that forward. So I find that question far more interesting, if that's what's going to happen. And I don't know the answer, to be honest. But yeah, it's a sizable amount of the Japanese political elite and leadership want that.
All right. Let's see. Felix wanted to know, he asks, so do you believe, like me, that this virus will oxygenize some sectors of society like the Black Plague did? English peasants and serfs saw the implementation of more fair wages. Does that make sense?
No, because there's not enough people being killed for that to happen. The prime consequences will be economic. It will be enormous wealth inequality. As I said
Gotcha.
before. Yeah.
All right. Samuel Starcharger wanted to know, out of all the American candidates that ran for...
I changed it.
Oh, you changed it?
Yeah, I changed that. You want me to read it?
Yeah, pull yours up. Yeah, go ahead and read it, Sam.
Yeah, I'll read it. Nice to meet you, by the way.
Thank you.
Would you be open to an AMA panel with other YouTubers? And if you could pick 3 others, who would you want? And then my side question is, what do you think of people who put social democracy in the same category as post-capitalist ideology?
On the second one, they are simply wrong. It's not the same thing. It's literally not the same thing. On the first one, yes, but who with? Brain for Breakfast is dead, unfortunately. So, Caspian Report. I take Paint and Politics Dude. I'll take him with me since he's a smaller channel and I like helping out smaller channels. I don't know who else. Let me quickly check my own subscriptions. Oh god, yeah. As you know, as I said before, I mostly watch trash. Is there something here that isn't trash? Jesus. Oh my god, so much trash. Historia Civilis. He's a Roman historian. Historian on ancient Rome. But I would more listen to him because I know very little. I'm undereducated on Roman history. So it would be very interesting to me. So those are the three then. Okay.
All right. This one, let's see. This one seems a bit accusatory here from Johnny Pickle. He says, why did you downplay Ataturk's anti-Armenian racism in your Turkish video?
Because I'm going to make a future video on the history of Greece. And it will be more relevant. What happened during the Turkish War of Independence will be more important in that time. But I know I had a lot of people accuse me of being too soft on Ataturk. Let me underline, I tried to be neutral in my video. I did put a criticism of his nationalism in there. I mentioned that there was ethnic cleansing going on during the Turkish War of Independence. And if you think I was too soft, I will be going into the consequences of Ataturk's nationalism in the second part, which were not, as you probably know, the guy asking the question, not all that positive.
Gotcha. Got to save some of it for later, Let's see. So Tech wants to know, what do you think of North African countries, especially Morocco? Will they ever compete at an international scale? I know you touched on a bit of that earlier.
Look at Tunisia right now. That's an interesting one. Because Tunisia might be going through what Turkey went through in the 1930s, just less authoritarian. It might be going through a secularization and a complete revamp of its culture. That will be very interesting to observe. So keep an eye out on Tunisia. And it's all happening democratically and not authoritarian, through authoritarian means like it did in Turkey. And concerning Morocco, I don't know much besides that they have a very stable and growing economy, and that they make a lot of fuss about it, and that a lot of people talk about the Moroccan economy being so successful. Okay.
All right. Beppis wants to know how you like Vienna.
It's very nice. I actually like it here. It's a beautiful city. It wasn't very bombed out during the Second World War, so you get a lot of old architecture. People are assholes, a lot of them. But that's not just a stereotype. Like, it's a stereotype in German-speaking countries that the Viennese are all assholes. And it's kind of true to a certain extent. But I enjoyed it, yeah.
All right. And then Beppis also wanted to know, what's your thoughts on the future of NATO?
My thoughts, my belief. Well, I hope that it continues. I want it to expand. I wanted to invite new nations, countries that are not just European or North American. Like, I would extend an invitation to Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa. I would like to see a rewriting of the NATO Charter to not just be North Atlantic, but a global alliance of democracies.
All right. Let's see. So Awu wants to know, what is your view on public and private debt, particularly for countries with debts denominated in foreign currencies / currencies they cannot print? One example being Greece. Do you have any political opinions on it?
Yeah, it has historically always been a way that countries wreck themselves, hasn't it? Like that's what happened to Argentina 10 years ago. They owed so much dollars to the US, had no way to pay it back. And then when their state bonds were sold to a private hedge fund, that hedge fund basically wrecked the Argentine economy to squeeze a few $1 billion out of it. It's really, yeah, it's a very stupid thing for a country to do. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Yuri Barrows wants to know in the optics of illiberal democracies, what do you think about Brazil's president Jair Bolsonaro?
He's a symptom of something that has cursed Latin American politics for the last 200 years, which is corrupt institutions that never change, while the only thing that changes within the corrupt institutions of governments is the people who rule over them. But the corrupt institution themselves never change. So you have this exchange of people who are left-wing corrupt, get kicked out, and someone who's right-wing corrupt comes in, not even democratic, often sometimes per coup. I'll go into that in the Latin America video. There's a fundamental corruption and authoritarianism problem with some of the largest political institutions in many democratic societies, and Bolsonaro is a symptom of that. He's kind of a return of the ghosts of the military juntas of the 1970s. I think they're called Los Banditos in Chile and in Argentina, which is a giveaway to how corrupt they are. Yeah. I'll talk about this in more detail, hopefully in the future.
Yeah, they're really trying to get at that South American content there. Let's see. Nyoku wanted to know how the dating scene is in Germany and Austria.
I'm a history student, so I was looking forward to dating some students, right? And it turns out they're all 19 years old or 20 years old, and so I don't really do that because I'm 29, and when I hit on someone who's 10 years younger than me, it's a bit awkward. And the first thing that goes through my head is, "Oh, you were in diapers when 9/11 happened." So
Gotcha.
yeah.
All right. Well, all right. Mad Banana wants to know what direction you think German politics will take in the post-Merkel era.
It will continue like it always has. That will just continue as it always has. German politics has always been very stable. Like, you will just have another big political leader come in, be they social democratic or conservative. German politics is very stable, yeah. Federal politics, at least. Regional politics, not so much. But yeah. That might be the biggest change. Something that happened over the course of the last 10 years was that states that were traditionally conservative suddenly voted for the left, and states that voted left suddenly voted conservative. Like that, there was this weird, in the US you have this concept of red states and blue states, and that concept, we had the same thing in Germany. We had conservative states and left-wing states, but it's falling apart. Like there's no more guarantee just because this state has always been left-wing that it will vote left-wing again. That entire political constellation is falling apart. People are now they put more thought into who they vote for. And just because they voted for the same party for 20 years doesn't mean that they will vote for it again anymore. People are more likely in Germany now to vote for a new party or a different party at a different election.
All right. Let's see. What Tosia wants to know, what are your thoughts on right-wing libertarianism?
I'm one of those people who likes to separate libertarianism from like right-wing and left-wing.
Oh,
The reason why I do it is because I encounter many right-wing libertarians who like to I encounter many libertarians who hate the terms right-wing libertarian and left-wing libertarian. because libertarianism, if you look at the party in the United States and wherever libertarian parties exist, they usually have a very well-defined, points program, which they stand by, a set of beliefs. It's not something that they waver on into different directions very frequently.
All right. Let's see. Stelto wants to know, what is your opinion on Napoleon Bonaparte? Was he a dictator or not?
A dictator. I'm one of the... I fall into the category of people who have a negative opinion of him. Okay. It's a complex topic. I don't think I want to go deep into it.
Gotcha. All right. Slovene Pepe wants to know if you have an opinion on Serbia.
These are very general questions, and I don't know how to answer them. Like
That's
what? Like Serbia 800 years ago, Serbia 20 years ago, Serbia now?
Make these a bit more specific, guys.
Someone just pointed out that I talked about the term libertarianism and not about the ideology itself. I would say it has some value to it, but I don't sign off to all of it. That's all I'm going to say. And concerning Serbia, I can give you some basic facts. Like, it can't join the European Union because the Dutch are blocking them. And the Dutch will block them until they acknowledge the Bosnian genocide. And that Serbia is increasingly looking outside of Europe for partners. And it's funny enough falling more and more into economic ties with Turkey as a result of this.
Man, look out for Turkey, I guess.
Yep.
Galalad wants to know, if you were to reform the EU, how would you?
Confederation instead of federation. Which basically means states' rights, I guess, would make sense in American terminology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Let's see. Habibi Smurf wants to know, what do you think about the consequences of the Arab Spring?
Only positive for Tunisia, vastly negative for everyone else. Yeah. It's something.
Knocking them out now. Let's see. Okay.
Do you know what you just said, by the way? You know what Habibi means? It means baby in Arabic.
Oh, it isn't? I was just wondering if I said anything bad. So that's good. I was kind of glad.
No, it's not a bad word at all.
Gotcha. I was a little nervous reading that one, but let's see. Napoleon Bonaparte asked a question. I wonder if he's going to be upset with what you said earlier. What do you tell the people of Turkey who want to see change with the current president and the present political system? What can the Turkish do to restore secularism and install lasting democracy in their country?
Well, it's very simple. Just don't vote for Erdogan.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Erdogan has a very tight grip on the rural poor and the poor in general. Slightly losing his grip on the poor, especially in urban areas. But yeah, the simple thing is just don't vote for him. Erdogan is, he's very authoritarian in his rule, but he is democratically approved. He's elected. And the way the Turks can get rid of him is just voting him out of office, basically. Yeah.
Gotcha. Go out and vote.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can solve a lot of problems that way. The Swede wants to know, would you make a video on the geopolitics of the Baltic Sea?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. A lot of people don't talk about the Navy shenanigans between Russia and Sweden. That would be something I would like to talk about. How the Swedes, despite being this small little country, still managed to bully the Russians substantially, and kind of through that expose how the Russians are not as strong as the Russians would like you to believe they are. That's definitely an interesting topic to cover. Yeah.
Well, I'll look forward to that one because I don't know anything about the shenanigans.
Okay.
Let's see. Johnny Milos wants to know: do you think that the modern liberal democratic consensus is the end of history? Additionally,
No.
what are your thoughts on Francis Fukuyama?
There is no end of history. I think Francis Fukuyama also abandoned that idea. There is no end of history. I find the idea nonsensical. Because God knows what happens in the future. Like, we could all collapse into communism in 20 years' time. Who knows? Who knows?
Gotcha. All right. Electrior wants to know: do you think we should ally with Russia or have it be at least a buffer country between the West and China if there's going to be a Cold War? I'm not sure who we is.
There is no allying with Russia. Russia screwed everyone over who approached it in a nice way. Putin basically built his political career on taking advantage of everyone who was naive enough to trust him. So there is no allying with Russia. And Russia it for a very long time ignored the threat coming for it from China. But keep in mind, it's a very aggressive nation. It's not as powerful as you think it is, but it is still very aggressive and swift to act aggressively against any potential threat.
All right. Let's see. We're getting to the end of the questions here. And I feel like this one might be an obvious answer, but I'm Jack All Right Baby wants to know: do you think China will spread its surveillance state style of government across the world, or do you? What's up?
It already is.
Yeah.
It already is. It sold its surveillance system to various Latin American countries, and you might have noticed that there are some free-to-play mobile games available that are made in China, right? And I have friends who work in tech who are very suspicious over them because they believe they collect user data for various, not just Chinese companies, but possibly even the Chinese state. So they already are.
Yeah, I'm pretty nervous about that myself. I guess we'll see how that goes. Electrior wants to know: do you think there will ever be a Korean unification like with Germany?
That depends on if the Kim dynasty collapses. If it does, yeah, probably. Yeah. It's very hard to tell with these things. Like, when these questions come up, it's very hard to tell. I remember I read articles by people arguing that who argued that North Korea would collapse in the early 90s with the end of the Soviet Union. That, of course, didn't happen. It's very hard to predict these things. People believed that Franco's Spain would collapse right after the end of the Second World War. Instead, it continued existing for almost 40 more years. So these things are always very hard to tell.
All right. Dr. Piraquito wants to know: what's your opinion on the Portuguese Estado Nova regime?
Estado Novo. That was the fascist regime junta that ruled Portugal until 1974. Opinion, yeah, horrible state, disgusting dictatorship. Good that it collapsed. What a lot of people don't know about the Estado Novo is that it had a surveillance state that was almost as extreme as the Stasi in East Germany. Like, literally everyone was spied upon. It had one of the largest spying networks in the world. It's also one of the reasons why so many Portuguese live abroad. Why you have such large Portuguese communities in North America, in France, and in parts of Africa even. Because a lot of people just fled that regime, basically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then that was a two-parter. Piraquito also wanted to know: almost 2 years into Bolsonaro's term in Brazil, do you believe he was a necessary evil, or should the Workers' Party have won the elections?
I wouldn't have voted for him. I can tell you. I don't tell people who to vote for on my channel. I don't endorse candidates, but I wouldn't have voted for him. I think he's a disgrace. I think he's a wretched little goblin. Yeah, I don't have anything positive to say about the man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And then we've had a lot of China-focused questions here. So I guess we'll wrap it up with one from Felix. What do you think the understanding was of Bonaparte when he said that the dormant dragon, as he saw China, once awake, would tremble the world?
That's a comment on how, China was the predominant global power right up to the 1600s. And it had an enormous arrogance toward the outside world. Enormous. Like when the first Christian missionaries and Islamic missionaries, right? I don't think you can really call them missionaries when they were Islamic, but when the first Muslims and Christians with the intention of converting the Chinese to their religion arrived in China, right? The Chinese responded to them with, well, if your God is real, why did he reveal himself to you fucking sand savages, basically?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how they had like this really downward looking, almost racist attitude to all foreign cultures. And that resulted also in a great isolation. They saw themselves as, we are this heavenly kingdom, the one great functioning society. Nobody will ever be as great as us. All these white guys, the Arabs, the Africans, the Indians, they're nobodies. And because of that, they had this isolationist attitude where they didn't let anyone in or out. And I think what Napoleon meant with that, because the British at the time were very eager to open the Chinese market. And maybe Napoleon understood that if China was opened again, it would become a power, something to reckon with down the road. Yeah. It's midnight now.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, and that actually was the last question. So thanks so much for coming on and addressing, this wide range of questions we had for you. I definitely learned a lot.
Thank you. I'll if you want, you can have me on again at some point in the near future. Just send me a DM, and I'll try my best to be available.
Well, yeah, I'd love to reach out to you again later. There's definitely some other people kind of in your realm that I'd like to talk to, and I'd love to see you talk with them as well. So we'll try and hit you up later. And if anybody wants to continue the talk down in some of the lower chats, feel free to jump down there and discuss anything we talked about here. But yeah, thanks again. I guess we'll wrap that up here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I added you, by the way, Kraut. So like if I have any, because I have any ideas about like which people you want to speak to and stuff, it'd be like an easy way to contact you. But yeah.
Okay, shoot me a DM. I'll try to be around. Okay. Have a good one. And thank you.
Hope you feel better.
You too.
Get some rest.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.